The crowd froze when the man collapsed. In the middle of a packed American airport terminal, rolling suitcases, boarding calls echoing overhead, a uniformed general hit the floor like a felled statue. Panic rippled outward. Phones came up. People shouted for help. Security hesitated. Then a young woman pushed through the chaos. She wore scrubs. No rank, no authority. Just a rookie nurse badge clipped to her chest. They told her to step back. Said she wasn't qualified, said help was coming. She didn't listen. She dropped to her knees and began CPR, as if her life depended on it, because somehow it did. Seconds stretched. Sweat burned her eyes. The man's chest refused to rise. And then against all odds, the general's eyes snapped open. He looked straight at her and whispered a name no one else recognized. Her call sign. In that instant, the noise vanished. The airport went silent, and everything people thought they knew about that rookie nurse shattered. Before the story unfolds, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you're drawn to stories where truth rises in the most unexpected moments, consider subscribing. You won't want to miss what happens next. The first thing Emily Carter noticed was the sound, not the shouting, not the alarms, but the hollow thud when the man's body hit the polished airport floor. It was the kind of sound you never forgot once you heard it, the unmistakable weight of a human life dropping without warning. She had been walking toward Gate C-17 coffee, cooling in her mind, half focused on the night shift ahead at Street Ann's trauma center. 12 hours on her feet. Another stretch of proving herself. Another reminder that rookie was still the word most people used before her name. Then someone screamed. Emily turned just in time to see the man stumble, one hand clutching his chest, his carry-on sliding from his grip. His uniform pressed, decorated, unmistakably military, made several bystanders freeze instead of rush forward. Authority, even when unconscious, had a strange way of stopping people in their tracks. He went down hard. For half a second no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Call 911, is he breathing? Give him space. Airport security pushed through the crowd, palms out, radios crackling. A TSA officer knelt unsure what to do with his hands. Someone tried to roll the man onto his side and was immediately yelled at by someone else who sounded just as uncertain. Emily set her coffee down without remembering doing it. She was already moving. She dropped to her knees beside the man, fingers automatically searching for a carotid pulse. Her training took over before fear had time to argue. Nothing. No pulse. No breath. Skin already cooling beneath her touch. Cardiac arrest. "Ma'am, step back," a security officer said, sharply grabbing her shoulder. "We've got medics on the way." "I'm a nurse," Emily said, shrugging him off without looking up. "He doesn't have a pulse." That got a few heads to turn. The officer frowned at her badge. "An airport isn't a hospital. We can't just—" "If we wait, he's dead," she said. Calm. Flat. Absolute. She interlocked her hands, placed them at the center of the man's chest and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. Her shoulders aligned over her wrists, elbows locked, depth and rhythm drilled into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions on dummies, on patients, on bodies that never woke up. The crowd drew back, forming an uneven circle. Phones rose higher. Someone whispered, "Is she allowed to do that?" Emily counted under her breath. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The man's chest rose slightly. Not enough. She adjusted. Increased pressure. Sweat gathered at her temples. The terminal felt too warm, the air too thick. Somewhere overhead, a voice droned about a delayed departure to Denver, utterly indifferent to the life slipping away below it. "Emily," a voice called. She glanced up briefly to see Mark Reynolds, a paramedic she recognized from the local EMS rotation, pushing through with a medical bag slung over his shoulder. Relief flickered, but only briefly. "Pulse?" he asked. "None," she said. "Down less than 2 minutes when I started." Mark nodded, already kneeling opposite her. "Good. Keep going." That should have been the end of it. A clean handoff. Professionals aligned. But the security officer returned louder now. "Sir, we need to clear this area. She needs to move." Mark shot him a look. "She's doing CPR. She's not with EMS. She's keeping him alive," Mark snapped. "Back off." The officer hesitated, then stepped away, jaw tight. Emily didn't look up again. She couldn't afford to. Her arms burned. The man's sternum resisted, then gave slightly beneath her hands a sensation she recognized and ignored. Broken ribs were better than a dead heart. "Get the AED," Mark called. A TSA agent sprinted off. Emily kept counting. In her peripheral vision, she saw the insignia on the man's uniform more clearly now. Stars. Not one. Not two. General. A murmur rippled through the crowd as others noticed it too. "Oh my God, that's a general. Like, a real one." Emily pushed the thought away. Rank didn't matter when the heart stopped. Blood didn't care about medals. The AED arrived. Mark tore it open, slapped pads onto the man's chest. "Clear," he shouted. Emily leaned back as the device charged. The shock hit with a jolt that made the man's body lift slightly off the floor. They waited. Nothing. Emily was already back on his chest before Mark finished speaking. Again. 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 Her vision narrowed. The noise faded. There was only rhythm and resistance and the silent plea she never admitted to herself that this time, please let it be enough. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Then, a cough. Weak. Barely there, but unmistakable. Mark's eyes widened. Hold, hold. Emily froze, hands hovering inches above the man's chest. The general's eyelids fluttered. A collective gasp sucked the air from the terminal. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. They were sharp, focused. Too focused for a man who'd just come back from the edge. They locked onto Emily. His lips moved. She leaned closer, heart hammering now for a different reason. So Mark said, "Can you hear me?" The general ignored him. His gaze never left Emily's face. And then in a voice barely louder than breath, he spoke, "Raven, 7. Emily felt the world tilt. For half a second she forgot where she was, forgot the crowd, forgot the cameras, forgot the years she'd spent burying that name under scrubs and silence. Raven 7 wasn't just a call sign. It was a past she had sworn never to bring back to life. "What did he say?" someone whispered. "Is he hallucinating?" Emily swallowed hard, forcing her expression to remain neutral. Mark glanced between them. "You know him, no," Emily said quickly. Too quickly. "He's confused." But the general's fingers twitched, brushing weakly against her wrist. His eyes stayed open. Alive. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder. Emily leaned back on her heels, chest heaving, arms shaking from exertion. She told herself it was just adrenaline, just exhaustion. Not the fact that a man who shouldn't have known her had just spoken a name no one else in that terminal was supposed to remember. As paramedics took over and the crowd pressed in again, Emily stood slowly, stepping back into the anonymity she thought she still owned. She didn't see the way Mark was watching her, and she didn't hear the security officer quietly radioing in his voice edged with uncertainty. "You're going to want to note this," he said. "The nurse who started CPR. She might be more than she looks." Emily's hands didn't stop shaking until the ambulance doors slammed shut. The sound echoed through the terminal like punctuation, final, decisive, yet her pulse kept racing as if the moment were still unfolding. Paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, lifting the general onto a stretcher, securing oxygen, calling out vitals. Someone finally asked for her name. She gave it. Someone else asked for her badge number. She gave that too. She did everything by the book, because the book was the only thing holding her together. As the stretcher rolled away, the crowd's attention shifted with it, a tide pulled by sirens and authority. Phones followed until security forced people back. Conversations erupted in whispers and speculation. A few strangers looked at Emily with awe, others with suspicion. One man muttered that she'd been reckless. Another said she was brave. None of it reached her. She stood near a pillar, back pressed to cool concrete, counting her breaths the way she had been taught long before nursing school. In through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts each. Keep your hands steady. Keep your face neutral. Emily. She looked up to see Mark Reynolds' approaching helmet tucked under his arm. He studied her with a mix of gratitude and curiosity that made her shoulders tense. "Good work back there," he said. "You probably bought him his life." She nodded once. It was a team effort. Mark hesitated. He said something. "Before we loaded him." Emily's jaw tightened. "People coming out of arrest say things." "Yeah," Mark said slowly. "They do, but they don't usually say things like that." She met his gaze, keeping her expression unreadable. Adrenaline. Hypoxia. It happens. Mark held her eyes for a beat longer, then let it go. You riding with us? No, she said. I'm due at Street Anne's tonight. That figures, he said, half smiling. Guess I'll see you there. As he turned away, Emily exhaled. The breath felt heavier than it should have. She didn't remember picking up her coffee. She only noticed it when the lid came off in her hand, and lukewarm liquid splashed onto the floor. She stared at the spreading stain, absurdly focused on the way it crept toward the grout line. Raven 7. The name burned behind her eyes. She forced herself to move. Through security, down the concourse. Past the windows where planes taxied like indifferent giants. Every step felt too loud, too visible. By the time she reached the parking structure, her legs ached with delayed tremors. She sat in her car for a full minute before turning, the key forehead resting against the steering wheel. She had known this day might come. She just hadn't expected it to come at an airport with a crowd watching, with cameras recording, with a ghost from her past, breathing again because of her hands. The drive to Street Anne's blurred into red lights and green. She arrived early, changed into fresh scrubs, tied her hair back with more force than necessary. The mirror showed a young nurse with tired eyes and a posture too rigid for civilian life. Get it together, she whispered. The ER was already humming, stretchers, rolling monitors, beeping voices overlapping in controlled chaos. Familiar ground, safe ground, or so she thought. The ambulance bay doors burst open less than an hour into her shift. Incoming trauma, a voice called. 70-year-old male cardiac arrest Rosk achieved on scene. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew before she saw him. The general was wheeled in oxygen mask, hissing, chest rising unevenly. His uniform had been replaced with hospital sheets, but the weight of his presence filled the room all the same. Doctors converged. Nurses moved in, practiced choreography. Emily, a sharp voice said. She turned to see Dr. Jonathan Myers, the attending physician for the night. Brilliant, abrasive, known for reminding new staff exactly where they stood. You're on intake, he said. Vitals only. Then step back. Yes, doctor. She took her position, fingers steady again as she checked blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation. Numbers spoke. Numbers didn't accuse. History, Dr. Myers asked. Unknown, the paramedic replied. Collapsed at airport. CPR initiated by bystander. Dr. Myers glanced at Emily. Bystander. She's an ER nurse, Mark said from the foot of the bed. Started compressions within 2 minutes. Dr. Myers' eyebrow lifted. At an airport. Emily kept her eyes on the monitor. Well, he said, tone cool, we'll see if her enthusiasm did more good than harm. The words landed like a slap. Emily said nothing. She stepped back as ordered hands clasped behind her back, watching as the team worked around the man she had pulled back from death. Tubes. Lines. Commands barked and answered. Then the monitor dipped. Pressures dropping, someone called. Start fluids. Prep for intubation. The general's chest stuttered, breath hitching. The room tightened. Emily's instincts screamed. She saw it before the numbers confirmed it, the subtle signs of another crash. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She was intake. Vitals only. The monitor flatlined. Code blue. The room erupted. Emily didn't wait. She moved, stepping forward, hands already positioning over the general's chest. Emily. Dr. Myers barked. Step back, I've got compressions, she said, voice cutting through the noise. Depth and rhythm are good. For a split second, authority and necessity collided. Then Dr. Myers nodded sharply. Fine, you keep going. She compressed. Again, again, again. This time there was no crowd, no cameras, just the familiar burn in her arms and the relentless tick of seconds slipping away. Clear. The shock hit. The body jolted. They waited. Nothing. Emily didn't stop. Her breaths counted time. Her hands remembered what her mind refused to revisit, sand under boots, rotor wash in the dark, a voice in her ear calling targets and distances. Again, Dr. Myers said. Another shock. The monitor spiked. A rhythm returned, fragile but present. A collective release swept the room. Emily stepped back, chest heaving, sweat dripping down her spine. Good, Dr. Myers said curtly. Get her out of here. The words cut deeper than the chaos had. She was escorted to the hallway, heart still pounding, when a man in a dark uniform approached, ranked precise, unmistakably military, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "Emily Carter?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Colonel Nathan Brooks," he said, "and I need to ask you something." He paused, lowering his voice. "Where did you learn to bring a general back from the dead like that?" Emily held his stare, every instinct telling her the quiet life she'd built was cracking wide open. Emily felt the hallway narrow around her as Colonel Nathan Brooks waited for her answer. The ER doors swung open and shut behind him, releasing bursts of sound orders, alarms, hurried footsteps, but the space where they stood seemed insulated from all of it. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The floor smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. "I learned CPR in nursing school," Emily said evenly. It was the right answer, the safe answer. Colonel Brooks studied her the way people did when they already knew the truth and were deciding how hard to push. He was in his late 40s, fit posture, rigid without being stiff. His uniform was immaculate, the kind of immaculate that came from habit, not vanity. "That's not what I meant," he said. Emily met his gaze. She had spent years practicing that look, open, unremarkable, forgettable. The look of someone with nothing to hide. Brooks exhaled slowly. General Hayes regained consciousness briefly in the ambulance. Emily's pulse ticked up a notch. She said nothing. "He asked for you," Brooks continued. "Not the doctors, not the paramedics. He asked for the nurse from the airport." "That doesn't mean anything," Emily said. "Post-arrest confusion is common." "Yes," Brooks agreed. "It is." He paused again, choosing his next words carefully. He also used a call sign. Emily felt the floor tilt just slightly, but enough. Brooks watched her reaction closely. He said, "Raven 7. The silence stretched. Emily's mouth felt dry. A lot of people use bird call signs. Brooks almost smiled. Almost. Not that one. Not anymore. Before she could respond, Doctor, Myers stepped into the hallway, irritation etched deep into his features. "Who's this?" he demanded. "Colonel Brooks," Brooks said calmly. "United States Army. Doctor." Myers' expression shifted instantly. Shoulders straightened, tone softened. "Of course. How can I help you, Colonel? I was just speaking with Nurse Carter." Brooks replied. "Privately. Doctor." Myers glanced at Emily. "She's needed back on the floor." Emily waited for the order. It didn't come. Brooks nodded. "I won't keep her." As Emily turned to leave, Brooks spoke again quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "If you were who I think you are," he said, "the past has a way of finding you whether you invite it or not." She didn't respond. She walked back into the ER, heart-hammering face composed. The rest of the shift blurred into a series of tasks she performed on autopilot. IVs, charting, monitoring vitals, answering call lights. Every action grounded her, anchored her to the present, but her thoughts kept drifting back, unbidden, unwelcome. Raven 7. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 4 years. Back then, it hadn't belonged to a nurse. It had belonged to a combat medic attached to a joint task unit that technically didn't exist. A unit that operated in places without names, on missions without paperwork. Her job had been simple and impossible at the same time: keep people alive long enough to get them home. She had been good at it. Too good, some would say. A sudden spike in alarms pulled her back. "ICU transfer," someone called. "General Hayes is stabilizing." Emily glanced toward the corridor leading to intensive care. For a brief moment she considered slipping away, asking to be reassigned, pretending none of this concerned her. Instead, she found herself standing outside the ICU doors 10 minutes later, staring through the glass. General William Hayes lay surrounded by machines, chest rising steadily now. His face was pale but composed, the lines of command still etched deep even in rest. He looked smaller without the uniform, without the weight of rank and expectation. A nurse adjusted his IV. A monitor beeped steadily, reassuring in its consistency. "You saved him twice," said behind her. Emily turned to see Mark Reynolds leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Anyone would have done the same," she replied. Mark shook his head. "No, not anyone." She waited for him to say more. "I've seen a lot of CPR," he continued. "Yours was different, calm, like you'd been there before." I have, Emily said. In the ER. Mark studied her. That's not what I meant either. She met his eyes. For a moment, she considered telling him something, anything, to deflect the truth. Instead, she said nothing. A door down the hall opened. Colonel Brooks emerged, speaking quietly into his phone. He stopped when he saw Emily. He's awake, Brooks said. Emily's breath caught despite herself. The general wants to see you, Brooks added. Now. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Her yes, Brooks said simply. Emily felt the weight of every choice she'd made since leaving the military settle onto her shoulders. She nodded once. Inside the ICU room, the air felt heavier, softer. Machines hummed, keeping vigil. General Hayes' eyes opened as she approached. They focused immediately. Recognition flared there, sharp, unmistakable. Raven 7, he said hoarsely. Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. Sir, she said, using the title out of instinct more than habit. You're in the ICU. You had a cardiac event. He smiled faintly. You always did cut through the noise. Colonel Brooks stood near the door, rigid, clearly trying not to intrude. I didn't expect to see you here, Hayes continued. Not like this. I didn't expect to see you at an airport, Emily replied. A weak chuckle escaped him. It dissolved into a cough. You never quit, he said again. I knew it was you the moment you put your hands on my chest. Emily swallowed. You were dying, sir. And you brought me back, he said. Again. Brooks shifted. General, the doctors say you need rest. Hayes waved him off. In a minute. His gaze returned to Emily, intent now. Serious. They don't know who you are, he said quietly. Do they know, Emily said. And I'd like to keep it that way. Hayes' eyes softened. You deserve more than anonymity. So do the people who didn't make it, Emily replied. Silence settled between them, heavy with memory. Outside the room, voices rose. Footsteps approached more than one pair. A sense of movement, of attention converging. Colonel Brooks glanced toward the door, then back at Emily. There are people asking questions, he said. High-level questions. Emily felt a familiar tightening in her chest, not fear but inevitability. The past hadn't just found her. It was knocking. And this time it wasn't going to be ignored. The questions started quietly. They always did. Emily noticed it first in the way conversations paused when she entered a room. Nurses who usually joked at the charting station suddenly found reasons to check supplies. A resident asked her twice to repeat her last name, as if confirming it against something unseen. Security made an extra pass through the ICU corridor, their radios crackling with low-coded voices. She kept her head down and worked. That had always been her way. Do the job, don't invite attention, let competence speak and silence cover the rest. But silence, she was learning, only worked when no one was listening for echoes. Near midnight, Dr. Myers called a brief huddle. General Hayes is stable, he announced, arms folded. Cardiology will take over in the morning. Until then, ICU protocols apply. No visitors beyond immediate clearance. He looked directly at Emily as he said the last part. She gave a small nod. The meeting dispersed, but Dr. Myers lingered. He waited until the others were out of earshot before speaking again. You handled yourself well today, he said. It sounded like a concession rather than praise. Thank you, Doctor. He studied her fingers tapping against his clipboard. Colonel Brooks asked about your background. Emily felt the familiar tightening in her stomach. I'm a licensed ER nurse. My credentials are on file. Yes, Myers said. So is your previous employer. She met his gaze, which was another hospital. And before that, he pressed. Emily kept her voice steady. I took time off. Myers' eyes narrowed. For what? For personal reasons. Silence stretched. Then he exhaled through his nose. Whatever history you're carrying, he said, don't let it interfere with patient care. It won't, Emily replied. It never has. He nodded once, curt, and walked away. Emily returned to her tasks, but the sense of being watched followed her like a shadow. At 217A, M, a pair of uniformed officers arrived at the ICU desk. Not hospital security, military police. Their presence drew immediate attention. One of them spoke quietly to the charge nurse, who glanced toward Emily before nodding. Emily finished adjusting an IV pump and turned as the nurse approached. They'd like to speak with you, the charge nurse said softly. In the conference room, Emily washed her hands, dried them carefully, and followed. The conference room was small, windowless. The two officers stood as she entered. Colonel Brooks was already there, leaning against the table, arms crossed. "Thank you for coming, Nurse Carter," he said. She remained standing. "Am I required to be here?" "No," Brooks said, "but it would help." She folded her hands loosely in front of her. "Then ask." Brooks exchanged a glance with the officers, then gestured for them to wait outside. When the door closed, he turned back to her. "I'm not here to expose you," he said. "I'm here to understand." Emily's jaw tightened. "Understand what? How?" "A civilian nurse recognizes battlefield signs faster than seasoned trauma surgeons," he replied evenly. "How you knew when the general was about to crash before the monitors did." "Experience," she said, from where Brooks asked. Emily hesitated just long enough to be noticed. Brooks sighed. "Emily, the general requested that I look into this. That's not a small thing." "He shouldn't have," she said quietly. "But he did." She looked away, eyes fixing on the blank wall. For a moment, the hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. "I didn't lie," she said finally. "I am a nurse. Everything I did today falls within that scope." "I believe you," Brooks said, "but that's not the whole truth." Emily closed her eyes. Images surfaced without permission, dust-choked air, the scream of rotor blades, blood slicking her gloves as she worked by headlamp light, voices in her ear counting down extraction windows, a decision she'd made once that couldn't be undone. She opened her eyes again. "I served," she said, "a long time ago." Brooks nodded. "As a combat medic?" "Yes. With Raven 7 as your call sign," he added. She didn't answer. Brooks leaned back against the table. "You saved General Hayes's life during a classified operation 6 years ago. He never forgot it." "That mission ended badly," Emily said. "People died." Brooks' expression softened. "People lived because of you." She shook her head. "I left for a reason." "And now?" he asked gently. "Now I'm a nurse in a hospital," she said. "That's all I want to be." Brooks studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll tell them that." Relief flickered through her, but it was short-lived. However, Brooks continued. "The general has requested a formal acknowledgement. Public." Emily's heart sank. "No. He's insisting." "I won't do it," she said, sharper now. "I didn't save him for recognition." Brooks sighed. "That may not be your decision to make." Before she could respond, the door opened. Dr. Myers stood there, face tight. "He's crashing again," he said. The conference room emptied in seconds. Emily sprinted back to the ICU, instincts roaring back to life. The monitor told the story before anyone spoke, erratic rhythm, pressure plummeting. "Get ready to intubate," Myers ordered. "We're losing him." Emily moved without waiting for instruction, positioning herself at the bedside. A nurse handed her equipment, automatically trust overriding hierarchy in the moment of crisis. "Pulse is thready," someone called. Emily placed her fingers at the carotid artery. "Weak. Fading. Now," she said. "We don't have time." Myers hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." She took over airway management movements, precise calm. The room followed her lead without realizing it. For a moment, everything balanced on the edge. Then the rhythm stabilized. A collective breath released. Myers looked at Emily, something like respect flickering across his face. "Good call." She nodded once, stepping back. As the crisis passed, Colonel Brooks watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Emily met his gaze, knowing the truth was no longer something she could keep contained. Not after this. Not when lives kept depending on it. The ICU settled into an uneasy calm after the second crisis. Machines resumed their steady cadence, a fragile rhythm that everyone pretended meant safety. Nurses rotated in and out with hushed efficiency. The lights were dimmed, curtains drawn, yet the tension lingered like static in the air, sharp enough to prickle the skin. Emily stood at the foot of General Hayes' bed, charting vitals with deliberate care. Her hands were steady again, but her mind wasn't. She could feel it now, the shift, not just in how people looked at her, but in how they waited. Doctors paused when she spoke. Nurses glanced her way before making decisions. Even Dr. Myers, proud and guarded, had stopped correcting her in front of others. Authority was moving, quietly, reluctantly. Colonel Brooks remained nearby, always just outside the room or down the hall, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. Each time he glanced her way, Emily felt the walls closing in a little more. She finished charting and stepped out into the corridor. The clock above the nurse's station read 3:41 You should get some water, Mark said, handing her a bottle without asking. Thanks. She took a sip, grateful for the grounding sensation. How bad is it? He shrugged. He's stable. For now. Emily nodded. That's all we can ask for. Mark hesitated, then leaned closer. The military guys. They've been asking about you, I figured. You want to tell me what's going on? He asked gently. Emily met his eyes. She trusted Mark, as much as she trusted anyone here, but trust had limits and she'd learned them the hard way. I just want to do my job, she said. Mark studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Before he could say more, a commotion rose near the ICU entrance. 2 men in suits entered, flanked by hospital security. Their demeanor was different from the others, controlled, deliberate eyes scanning everything at once. One of them flashed a badge too quickly for Emily to read. Who's the nurse who performed CPR at the airport? The man asked. The hallway went quiet. Several heads turned toward Emily. She felt it again, that narrowing, that sense of inevitability. She stepped forward before anyone else could answer. That was me, she said. The man nodded. We'd like a word. Colonel Brooks appeared instantly, moving to Emily's side. This needs to go through proper channels. It will, the second man replied, but not later. Emily's grip tightened on the water bottle. Am I being detained? No, the first man said smoothly. Just consulted. She glanced at Brooks. His jaw was set. I'll be right here, he said quietly. They led her into a private office near administration. The door closed with a soft click that sounded far too final. The men introduced themselves, federal investigators' names that slid past her without sticking. One of them sat. The other remained standing, arms crossed. You were very effective at the airport, the seated man said. Textbook technique. Exceptional composure. Emily folded her hands in her lap. I followed protocol. Protocol usually comes with hesitation, the standing man said. You didn't hesitate. Emily said nothing. The seated man leaned forward. General Hayes is a high-value individual. When someone saves his life twice, we take notice. I didn't know who he was, Emily replied. And it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe not to you, he said. But it matters to a lot of people. Silence stretched. Colonel Brooks informed us of your prior service, the man continued. Limited details. Classified. Emily's pulse quickened. Then you know why I don't want this discussed. We know why you left, the standing man said quietly. We also know why you were recruited in the first place. Emily's jaw tightened. You don't get to disappear after the kind of service you gave, he added. Not completely. I wasn't trying to disappear, she said. I was trying to live. The seated man's expression softened, and yet when the moment came, you stepped forward. Because someone needed help, Emily said. That's it. The men exchanged a look. We're not here to pull you back, the seated man said finally. At least not yet. Her breath caught despite herself. But there will be questions, he continued. From the hospital, from the media, from the military. This story won't stay contained. I won't speak, Emily said. Not about the past. The standing man nodded slowly. That's your right. For now. They stood. The interview was over as abruptly as it had begun. When Emily stepped back into the hallway, the weight of every unspoken implication settled on her shoulders. Colonel Brooks was waiting. They're circling, he said quietly. You felt it, didn't you? Yes. They won't stop, Brooks continued. Not after tonight. Emily looked toward the ICU room. Through the glass, she could see General Hayes resting, his chest rising steadily. I don't regret saving him, she said. I know, Brooks replied. That's why this is hard. A nurse approached them, urgency in her eyes. Colonel, he's awake again, asking for Emily. Emily closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. Inside the room, General Hayes looked weaker than before, but his gaze was clear. You're causing trouble, he said softly as she approached. She almost smiled. You always did, sir. He studied her face. They're pressing you. Yes. I won't let them use you, he said firmly. Not like before. Emily met his gaze. This isn't about using me. It's about control. Hayes' lips curved into a tired smile. You always did see the battlefield clearly. He reached out, grasping her hand with surprising strength. You saved me, he said. Now let me return the favor. Emily felt a chill run through her. What do you mean? She asked. Hayes' eyes flicked toward the door where Brooks stood rigid. I'm calling in a review, the general said. Full authority. Emily's heart pounded. That will expose everything. Yes, Hayes said calmly. And it will also make something very clear. She leaned closer. What? That you were never just a rookie nurse. The words hung heavy in the air. Outside the room, alarms didn't sound. Voices didn't rise. But Emily knew the real escalation had begun, and there would be no stepping back from it. The review didn't announce itself with sirens or shouted orders. It arrived the way real power always did, quietly, deliberately wrapped in procedure. By sunrise, the ICU floor felt different. Not louder, not busier, just watched. Emily noticed the first sign, when a senior administrator she had never seen before appeared at the nurse's station suit, perfectly pressed eyes, scanning charts without touching them. Then came another. Then a woman from legal. Then a man who introduced himself as liaison without specifying to whom. No one asked Emily to leave. That more than anything told her how serious this was. General Hayes remained stable, resting under light sedation, but his presence dominated the floor, even unconscious. Orders flowed downward from places most of the staff had never interacted with. Clearances were checked. Doors that were usually open stayed locked. Emily moved through it all with controlled calm. Inside her past pressed closer. Colonel Brooks found her near the medication room mid-morning. They're convening a preliminary review board, he said quietly. Medical conduct, chain of command response, incident handling. Emily nodded. That's standard. For civilians, Brooks said. This isn't staying civilian. She met his eyes. I told you I don't want recognition. This isn't about recognition, he replied. It's about accountability. The word landed hard. Emily finished logging medication and closed the computer. Whose accountability? Brooks hesitated. Everyone's. Before she could respond, Dr. Myers approached, expression tight. They want statements, he said, from everyone involved in the airport incident and both codes. Emily waited. They asked specifically for yours, Myers added. And they asked me why I initially ordered you to step back. The silence between them stretched. Myers cleared his throat. I told them I was following protocol. And were you? Emily asked, not accusing, just honest. Myers' jaw flexed. I was following hierarchy. Emily nodded once. That's different. He didn't argue. The statement room was small and plain. A table, 3 chairs, a recording device no one mentioned but everyone noticed. Colonel Brooks sat in one chair, a hospital attorney in another. Emily took the third. State your name and role, the attorney said. Emily Carter, ER nurse. Describe your actions at the airport. Emily did. Succinct, clinical, no embellishment. When did you realize the patient was a general? The attorney asked. I didn't, Emily replied, until afterward. And would it have changed your actions? No. Brooks watched her carefully. Describe your training prior to nursing school, the attorney continued. Emily inhaled slowly. I served as a medic in the army. Silence. Details, the attorney prompted. Classified. Brooks nodded. That will suffice. The attorney glanced at him, then back at Emily. Why did you leave the service? Emily's fingers curled slightly against her thigh. Because I was done, she said. The attorney leaned back. Done with what? With war, Emily replied quietly. The questioning ended soon after. When Emily stepped back into the corridor, she felt lighter and more exposed. Mark caught up to her near the vending machines. They're tearing this place apart, he said, in a quiet, polite way. She almost smiled. That's the most dangerous kind. He hesitated. You okay? Emily considered the question. I don't know yet. He nodded, accepting that answer. Late afternoon brought the moment she'd been bracing for. General Hayes was awake again. Fully this time. Emily was asked, not ordered to come to his room. Colonel Brooks and 2 hospital administrators stood near the wall as she entered. Dr. Myers lingered by the monitors. Hayes looked tired but alert. When he saw Emily, his expression softened. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "Neither have you, sir." He smiled faintly. "Occupational hazard." The room settled into attentive silence. "I've reviewed the preliminary findings," Hayes said, voice steady despite its weakness. "They're thorough, predictable." His eyes shifted to the administrators. They confirmed that Nurse Carter acted decisively, correctly, and within medical best practice at every stage. Emily felt a subtle release of tension around the room. However, Hayes continued, "They also reveal something more concerning." Dr. Myers straightened. "They reveal how often competence is mistaken for insubordination," Hayes said. "How often rank overrides judgment. How often lives are put at risk because the wrong voices are ignored." The administrators exchanged glances. Hayes turned his gaze fully to Emily. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "Not because you're reckless, but because you've learned the cost of waiting." Emily held his eyes, saying nothing. "I requested this review," Hayes continued, "because I recognized a failure pattern. Not yours. The system's." Murmurs stirred. "I won't allow Nurse Carter to be paraded as a symbol," he said firmly. "But I will not allow her to be diminished." Dr. Myers swallowed. Hayes' voice sharpened. "She saved my life twice. Anyone in this room who questioned her authority should ask themselves why." The room was silent. One of the administrators cleared her throat. "General, with respect, this opens broader implications," Good Hayes interrupted. "It should." He turned back to Emily. "You didn't ask for this." "No, sir. And you don't want it." "No." Hayes nodded. "Then I'll be clear. You owe no one your past, but your present deserves respect." He shifted slightly, wincing, then continued. "I am issuing a formal commendation," he said. "Not public, not ceremonial, internal." Emily's breath caught. "Sir, this is not about glory," Hayes said. "It's about record. Truth has a way of being buried without one." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Hayes's eyes softened again. "You always were stubborn." A faint smile touched her lips. As the meeting dissolved, Dr. Myers approached her quietly. "I misjudged you," he said. Emily met his gaze. "Yes. I'm sorry," he added. She considered him for a moment. "So am I." That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows through the hospital windows, Emily stepped outside for the first time in hours. The air was cool, clean. She breathed deeply. For the first time since the airport, she felt something shift, not the world around her, but the weight inside her chest. The truth was no longer a threat. It was a presence, and whether she wanted it or not, it was changing how people looked at her. Tomorrow the consequences would ripple outward. But tonight Emily Carter stood under the fading sky, just a nurse again. And for now, that was enough. Morning came quietly, which unsettled Emily more than the chaos ever had. Sunlight crept through the tall hospital windows, washing the ICU corridor in pale gold. Night staff handed off reports in low voices. Coffee cups appeared. Stretchers rolled past. On the surface, everything looked normal again. But underneath it all, something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Emily finished morning rounds and paused at the nurse's station reviewing charts. Her name appeared on more screens than usual. Notes had been flagged. Access permissions adjusted. None of it was overt, yet each change carried the same message: she mattered now. And that made people uncomfortable. Dr. Myers approached holding a tablet. His posture was different, less rigid, less defensive. "There's a briefing in conference room B," he said. "Hospital leadership, military liaison. They asked for you." Emily didn't look up right away. "Asked," she repeated. "Yes," Myers said. "Specifically." She nodded once and followed. Conference room B was larger than the one from the night before. This time there were more seats filled and more empty ones that seemed intentionally reserved. Colonel Brooks stood near the window, speaking quietly to a woman in a navy suit Emily recognized from legal. Two men in uniform sat at the table, posture immaculate, expressions unreadable. The room went still when Emily entered. "Thank you for coming, Nurse Carter," the woman from legal said. "Please sit." Emily took the seat, offered hands folded in her lap. "This is not an interrogation," the woman continued. "It's a clarification." Emily had learned long ago that clarification was often a prelude to consequence. Colonel Brooks spoke next. General Hayes requested that we formalize what occurred medically and administratively. One of the uniformed men leaned forward. Your actions complied with emergency response standards, he said. Beyond that, your situational awareness exceeded expectations. Emily met his gaze. I was responding to a patient in cardiac arrest. Yes, he said. You were. Silence followed. Then the other uniformed man spoke. However, there are questions regarding disclosure. Emily felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Disclosure of what? Of prior service, he replied. I disclosed what was required, Emily said. Nothing more. Colonel Brooks nodded. And that is your right, the woman from legal interjected. But this incident will likely become public. Footage from the airport is circulating internally. It's only a matter of time before it leaks. Emily's jaw set. Then blur my face. It's not that simple, the woman said gently. Your name is already in the report. Emily leaned back slightly. Then correct the narrative. How one of the men asked. By telling the truth, Emily replied, that I was a nurse who did her job. A pause. Colonel Brooks studied her. The general agrees with you. Mostly. Emily looked at him. He believes the focus should remain on response time, preparedness, and systems, Brooks continued. Not on individual mythology. Relief flickered through her. But Brooks added he also believes that erasing context entirely creates another kind of injustice. Emily said nothing. The woman from legal folded her hands. The general has requested to speak with you again. Privately. Emily nodded. When now, Brooks said. The ICU room felt brighter in daylight. General Hayes was sitting up slightly, color-improved eyes sharp despite the fatigue etched into his features. He dismissed the nurse with a gesture as Emily entered. Close the door, he said. She did. Hayes studied her for a long moment. You look like you're bracing for impact. Experience, Emily replied. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Still honest, still guarded. She remained standing. You asked to see me, sir. I did, Hayes said. Because I owe you clarity. He took a breath. The footage from the airport will come out. People will ask who you are. Some will dig. Emily's shoulders tensed. I can handle that. I know, Hayes said. But the institution might not. She met his gaze. Then don't make me the story. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid, he replied. Hayes leaned forward slightly. I've spent my life watching systems protect themselves at the expense of individuals. I won't do that again. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. There will be an internal acknowledgement, Hayes continued. Restricted. Professional. It will establish record without spectacle. And the rest, Emily asked. Hayes' eyes sharpened. The rest will be reframed. Not, rookie nurse performs miracle. But prepared responder acts decisively when systems hesitate. Emily considered that. You're shifting the spotlight. Yes, Hayes said. From you to everyone. She nodded slowly. That's acceptable. Hayes exhaled, relieved. Good, because there's something else. Emily waited. The review board uncovered patterns, he said. Not just here. Across multiple facilities. Situations where voices like yours were overridden. Emily's brow furrowed. You're saying this isn't isolated? No, Hayes replied. And your case may force changes. Emily felt the weight of that settle over her. I didn't intend to be a catalyst. Catalysts rarely intend to be, Hayes said. They just exist at the wrong or right moment. A knock sounded at the door. Colonel Brooks stepped in. General Cardiology is requesting rest. Hayes waved him off briefly, eyes still on Emily. You can walk away from this, Hayes said quietly. Stay a nurse. Live quietly. I won't stop you. Emily met his gaze, heart steady now. I already chose that. Hayes smiled. Then know this. Whatever happens next, it won't erase who you are, or what you did. Emily nodded, emotion threatening to surface. As she turned to leave, Hayes spoke one last time. Raven 7, he said softly. She paused. Thank you, he added. Emily didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Outside the room, Colonel Brooks fell into step beside her. You're handling this well, he said. I'm surviving, she replied. Brooks nodded. For what it's worth, the system needs people like you, even when it doesn't admit it. Emily stopped at the end of the corridor, looking out through the glass at the parking lot below. Cars came and went. Lives continued. "I don't need the system to need me," she said quietly. "I just need it to stop getting in the way." Brooks smiled faintly. "That may be the hardest mission of all." Emily watched the morning unfold, unaware of how quickly the story beyond those walls was gaining momentum. The footage hadn't leaked yet, but it would, and when it did, silence would no longer be an option. The footage broke containment before noon. It didn't explode onto every screen at once. It slipped, leaked, found its way into the hands of people who recognized what they were seeing before the rest of the world did. A shaky clip from the airport. A woman in scrubs kneeling on polished tile. Compressions. Urgency. Authority without insignia. By early afternoon, the hospital's communications department was scrambling. Emily found out the same way everyone else did through the sudden change in atmosphere. Phones buzzed non-stop at the nurses' station. Administrators whispered behind closed doors. A television mounted in the waiting area switched from daytime programming to a muted news feed, the familiar red banner crawling across the bottom. Airport medical emergency questions raised. Emily kept walking. She had a patient in room 14 who needed a dressing change. A confused elderly man in room 9 asking for his wife. A medication schedule to follow. The rhythm of care was still there, still demanding, still grounding, but she felt the eyes now. Some curious, some admiring, some resentful. "Is that her someone?" whispered as she passed. Emily didn't look up. Colonel Brooks intercepted her near the stairwell. "It's out," he said simply. "I know." He studied her face. "You okay?" She considered the question. "I'm working." Brooks nodded. "That's what I thought you'd say." They walked together for a moment in silence. "They're calling it heroic," Brooks said. "Some are calling it reckless. A few are calling it insubordination." Emily exhaled. "Of course they are." The general issued a statement, Brooks continued. Short, focused, praising emergency preparedness and rapid response. Emily stopped. "Did he mention me?" "No," Brooks said. "Not by name." Relief flickered across her features before she could stop it. "But people are asking," he added. "They always do." Emily nodded. "Let them." The review board reconvened that afternoon, this time with urgency threaded through every word. The hospital's legal counsel addressed the room. "We are receiving external inquiries. Media, military oversight committees." Dr. Myers sat rigid, hands folded. "Our response must be unified," the counsel continued. "We cannot appear fragmented or defensive." Emily listened quietly. One of the administrators glanced at her. "Nurse Carter has become a focal point." Emily met her gaze, then shifted. "That's not entirely possible," the administrator said. "People like a face." Emily leaned forward slightly. "Then give them a system." The room stilled. "A system that trained responders well enough to act without hesitation," Emily continued. "A system that didn't require permission to save a life." Silence followed. Colonel Brooks spoke next. "General Hayes supports that framing." A few heads turned. "The general has also requested that any internal disciplinary discussions be suspended," Brooks added. "Pending full review." "Doctor," Myers exhaled quietly. After the meeting, Emily retreated to the stairwell, needing a moment away from the hum of attention. She sat on the concrete steps, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. She had known this would happen, had prepared herself, at least in theory. But preparation didn't stop the old instincts from flaring, the urge to disappear, to relocate, to shed another identity like an old skin. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from an unknown number. "Saw the footage." "That was you, wasn't it?" Emily stared at the screen. Another message followed. "They're saying a rookie nurse saved a general. That doesn't add up." She locked the phone and slipped it back into her pocket. Some stories weren't meant to be corrected by force. Some truths demanded patience. Back in the ICU, General Hayes watched the muted television from his bed, eyes thoughtful. "They're circling," he said when Emily checked in. "Yes, sir." "You still don't want to speak?" "No." He nodded. "Good." Emily glanced at the screen. Her image froze mid-compression, jaw set, focus absolute. "They don't see what mattered," she said quietly. Hayes followed her gaze. "What mattered? The time before help arrived," Emily replied. The hesitation. Hayes' expression darkened. That hesitation almost killed me. He turned to her. This will force conversations people have avoided for years. Emily met his gaze. And they'll blame the wrong things. Only if we let them, Hayes replied. Outside the room, voices rose. A group of staff had gathered around a phone, watching another clip. Look at her form, one nurse said. That's not basic training. A resident scoffed. She got lucky. Emily kept walking. Later that evening, Colonel Brooks found her again. There's a formal inquiry being scheduled, he said. National level. Emily paused. Into what emergency response standards at civilian hubs, Brooks replied. And cross-training with military protocols. Emily absorbed that. They're using this. Yes, Brooks said. But not against you. She nodded slowly. Good. Brooks hesitated. There's also pressure. From certain corners. To bring you forward. Publicly. Emily's eyes hardened. I won't. I know, Brooks said. But they may try to force the issue. Emily met his gaze steadily. Then they'll fail. That night, as her shift ended, Emily walked through the parking lot under a sky streaked with fading light. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number, another message she didn't open. She started her car and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. She had left one life behind because it demanded too much silence. Now the silence was demanding her again. But this time, she wasn't running. Tomorrow the inquiry would begin. And with it, the final question no one had asked out loud yet. Who was Emily Carter allowed to be? When the world finally noticed. The inquiry began the next morning in a room that wasn't quite a courtroom but felt close enough to make people sit straighter. Emily noticed the details immediately. The way the chairs were aligned with military precision, the absence of windows, the faint hum of a recorder no one officially acknowledged. Flags stood in the corners, not for decoration, for reminder. She took her seat at the long table, hands folded, posture calm. Colonel Brooks sat 2 chairs down. Across from them were representatives from the Department of Transportation hospital leadership and a pair of uniformed officers whose expressions never shifted. Dr. Myers entered last. He avoided Emily's eyes. Let's begin, the chairperson said. Her voice was even practiced. This inquiry concerns the emergency response at Hartwell International Airport and subsequent medical handling at Street Ann's Trauma Center. Emily listened as timelines were established. Minutes, seconds. Decision points dissected and replayed. The airport's delayed response. Security hesitation. The gap before EMS arrival. Then her name was spoken. Nurse Emily Carter, the chairperson said. Please describe your decision-making process. Emily did not hesitate. I identified a patient in cardiac arrest, she said. I assessed for pulse and breathing. Finding none, I initiated CPR. Without authorization, one officer interjected. Emily met his gaze. Authorization is not required to prevent death. A ripple moved through the room, not disagreement but recognition. The chairperson nodded slightly. Continue. Emily described compressions, AED, use coordination with arriving paramedics. She spoke clinically without emotion, letting the facts carry weight. And at the hospital, the chairperson asked. Emily paused for half a beat. At the hospital, I followed attending instructions until the patient deteriorated. At that point, I acted within my training to prevent loss of life. Dr. Myers shifted in his seat. Dr. Myers, the chairperson said. Why was Nurse Carter initially removed from the code? Myers cleared his throat. Protocol. Chain of command. Did her actions deviate from medical standards? The chairperson asked. No, Myers said quietly. Did they save the patient's life? Yes. The room went still. One of the uniformed officers leaned forward. Nurse Carter, is it correct that you have prior military medical training? Emily inhaled slowly. Yes. Why was that not disclosed? Because it was not required, she replied. My license is current. My competencies are documented. The officer frowned. Do you believe your background gave you an advantage? Emily considered the question carefully. I believe my background taught me the cost of hesitation. Silence followed. Colonel Brooks spoke next. The general has submitted a statement. He passed copies down the table. Emily did not look at it. She already knew what it would say. The chairperson skimmed the document, then looked up. General Hayes commends Nurse Carter's actions and expresses concern over systemic delays and hierarchical interference. Doctor, Myers' shoulders slumped slightly. The inquiry continued for hours. Policies were examined, training gaps exposed, questions asked that made administrators uncomfortable. Emily answered only what was asked, nothing more. When it ended, the chairperson stood. Preliminary findings will be released internally within 48 hours. She paused, eyes resting briefly on Emily. This inquiry is not punitive. It is corrective. Emily nodded once. Outside the room, reporters waited behind barriers. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted into the air like weapons. Emily Carter, is it true you saved a general's life? Were you ignored by hospital leadership? Is this about military secrets? Security guided her through a side corridor, away from the noise. Colonel Brooks walked beside her. They won't stop, he said quietly. I know. They're asking for a statement. Emily stopped walking. No. Brooks met her gaze. They'll find one anyway. Then it won't be mine, she replied. That evening, General Hayes watched the coverage from his hospital bed, jaw tight. They're turning it into spectacle, he said. Emily stood near the window, arms crossed. That was always going to happen. Hayes looked at her. You could end this. She turned to him. By saying what? By telling them who you were, he replied. Who you are. Emily shook her head. That's not the point. Hayes studied her for a long moment. You're protecting something. Yes, she said. The work, not the image. He nodded slowly. You always did understand the difference. A nurse entered quietly. General, you have a visitor. Hayes frowned. I'm not scheduled. The nurse hesitated. He said it couldn't wait. The door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, posture, sharp eyes assessing the room in a single glance. He flashed credentials too quickly to read. General Hayes, the man said. I'm with Federal Oversight. Hayes' expression hardened. You're late. The man turned to Emily. And you must be Nurse Carter. Emily met his gaze, heart steady. We have concerns, he continued, about classified overlap. Hayes sat forward. There is no overlap. Respectfully, sir, the man said, the public narrative is drifting, and when narratives drift, control follows. Emily felt the familiar chill crawl up her spine. What are you proposing? She asked. The man smiled thinly. A clarification. A managed disclosure. No, Emily said immediately. The man's smile didn't fade. You may not have a choice. Hayes' voice cut through the tension. You're done here. The man looked at him. With respect, General, I said. You're done, Hayes repeated, authority sharp despite the hospital gown. The man hesitated, then nodded. This isn't over. As he left, the room felt heavier. Hayes looked at Emily. They're pushing. I know. They may escalate. Emily's jaw set. So will I. Hayes studied her, then nodded. Good. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds. The inquiry had ended, but the real confrontation was only beginning. Somewhere between silence and exposure, Emily would be forced to choose a line, and when she did, there would be no going back. The findings were released at dawn, not publicly, not yet, but inside the hospital the effect was immediate. Emily felt it the moment she stepped onto the floor. Heads turned, not with curiosity this time, but with recalibration. Conversations paused, then resumed more carefully. A few nurses offered small, sincere smiles. One resident straightened his posture as she passed, as if unsure where the line was now. The internal memo circulated quietly. No disciplinary action warranted. Clinical judgment upheld. Protocol revision recommended. It wasn't praise. It was vindication. Doctor. Myers found her near the medication room holding a printed copy of the findings he hadn't realized he'd crumpled in his hand. I testified again this morning, he said. Emily glanced at the paper. About why I told you to step back, he replied. And why I was wrong. She studied his face. He looked tired. Older. I didn't lose my position, he added quickly. In case you were wondering. I wasn't, Emily said. Myers nodded, accepting the rebuke. But I did lose something else. She waited. Certainty, he said. About hierarchy. About control. Emily softened slightly. That happens. He hesitated. I also submitted a request. For what? To revise ER response policy, Myers said. To give experienced nurses more autonomy in codes, especially when seconds matter. Emily blinked, surprised despite herself. You didn't have to do that. Myers met her eyes. Yes, I did. Before she could respond, Colonel Brooks approached, expression composed but intent. The general is being transferred, he said. Private wing. He asked for you. Emily followed without comment. General Hayes' room was quieter, now stripped of the earlier urgency. The monitors still hummed, but softly. Sunlight filtered through, partially drawn blinds, illuminating the lines of fatigue on his face. You look better, Emily said. Hayes smiled faintly. Alive suits me. She stood beside the bed. You shouldn't be sitting up. I've ignored worse advice, he replied dryly. They shared a brief, knowing look. The findings are out, Hayes said. As expected. Emily nodded. They protected the institution. Yes, Hayes agreed. But they also acknowledged the truth. He reached for a folder on the bedside table and slid it toward her. What's this? She asked. A formal letter, Hayes said. Restricted circulation. Recognition of service past and present. Emily didn't touch it. I said I didn't want. This isn't about applause, Hayes interrupted gently. It's about record. Someday when someone tries to minimize what you did or who you were, this will exist. She stared at the folder, then nodded once. Thank you, Hayes exhaled. There's more. Emily looked up. I intervened, he said, with oversight. Her shoulders tensed. About what? About you, Hayes replied. They wanted managed disclosure, a narrative they could steer. Emily's jaw tightened. And you said no. I said absolutely not, Hayes said firmly. You saved my life. You don't owe anyone a performance. Relief washed through her, quiet, controlled, but real. They backed off, Hayes continued. For now. Emily met his gaze. For now is enough. Hayes smiled, still choosing the quiet path. Yes, she said. It's mine. Later that afternoon, the hospital gathered for a brief internal briefing. No cameras, no press, just staff. The administrator spoke carefully, outlining policy updates, training revisions, and acknowledgement of exceptional response, without naming names. But when she finished, she looked directly at Emily. And we are grateful, she said to those who acted when hesitation would have cost lives. Applause didn't follow. Respect did. As the room dispersed, Mark approached, eyes bright. They're rewriting protocols, he said. You know that, right? Emily nodded. Good. They're also asking for you to help train, he added. Voluntarily. Emily considered that. Maybe. He smiled. That's more than I expected. That evening, as the sun dipped low again, Emily stepped outside the cool air, easing the tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Her phone buzzed. A new message. No number. No greeting. They tried to make you visible. You stayed steady. That matters. Emily stared at the screen, then deleted the message without replying. Visibility had never been the goal. The next morning, General Hayes was moved to the private wing. Before he left, he asked for one last moment. You're choosing well, he said. Emily tilted her head. Am I? Hayes nodded. You're choosing who you are now, not who the world wants you to be. She met his gaze. So did you. He smiled. Eventually, as she watched him go, Emily felt something settle, not triumph, not relief, but alignment. The storm hadn't passed completely, but it no longer owned her. And for the first time since the airport floor pressed cold beneath her knees, Emily Carter felt unseen in the best possible way. The hospital returned to its usual rhythm faster than Emily expected. By the end of the week, the news cycle had moved on. Another crisis. Another headline. The airport footage still existed, archived, referenced, debated in professional circles, but the frenzy had dulled. What remained were changes quieter and far more lasting. Emily felt them in small moments. A junior nurse asking her opinion during a code, not because of rank, but trust. A resident pausing long enough to actually listen. A new checklist taped inside the trauma bay. Immediate action authority, when seconds matter, with language that hadn't existed before. She never saw her name on it. That felt right. On her next shift, she was assigned to train a group of nurses on advanced emergency response protocols. No press, no formal announcement. Just a small classroom, a whiteboard, and 12 attentive faces. She stood at the front, arms folded loosely, posture relaxed. "I'm not here to teach you how to be heroes," she said. "I'm here to teach you how not to freeze." A few smiles flickered. She walked them through scenarios, not hypotheticals but realities. Confusion, noise, authority pressing down when time pressed harder. She didn't reference the airport. She didn't reference the general. She talked about breath, hands, judgment. When the session ended, no one clapped. They thanked her anyway. Later that day, Dr. Myers caught up with her outside the trauma bay. "They approved the revisions," he said. Emily nodded. "Good. They asked me to lead the rollout," he added. "I told them I'd do it with you." Emily met his gaze. "Why?" "Because you see what I missed," he said simply. She considered him for a moment, then nodded. "All right." That evening, Emily found herself back in the ICU corridor where everything had changed. The glass reflected her faintly now, scrubs, hair pulled back, eyes steady. Just a nurse. Exactly who she'd chosen to be. Her phone buzzed again. This time the number was familiar. General Hayes. Discharged tomorrow. Wanted to say thank you properly. Emily typed a brief reply. "You already did. Take care, sir." A moment passed. Still stubborn came the response. "That's why you survived." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, a small smile touching her lips. The next morning, a quiet ceremony took place in a conference room with no windows and no audience. A handful of signatures. A sealed envelope placed into a secure file. History recorded, then it closed. Weeks passed. The airport returned to being just an airport. Travelers hurried. Announcements echoed. Somewhere near gate C-17 the tile had been replaced. No plaque marked the spot. Emily noticed that and approved. On a rare day off, she stood in line for coffee at a small cafe near the hospital. A television murmured in the corner, playing a muted segment about emergency preparedness nationwide. A narrator's voice drifted faintly. "Experts say the key isn't heroism, it's readiness." Emily took her coffee and sat by the window. Outside, an ambulance passed lights off, moving at an ordinary speed. She watched it disappear down the street. The world didn't need her past. It needed her present, and that was something she could live with. As she finished her coffee, a young woman in scrubs hesitated near her table. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. "You're Nurse Carter, right?" Emily looked up. "Yes. I just wanted to say thank you for the training, for the way you lead." Emily smiled gently. "You'll do the same someday." The woman nodded, visibly steadier, and walked away. Emily stood, dropped her cup in the trash, and stepped back into the flow of the city. No helicopters, no salutes, no call signs spoken aloud, just quiet competence moving where it was needed most. And somewhere far away, a general breathed easily because a nurse at an airport had refused to wait. Not every hero wears a uniform that demands attention. Sometimes courage looks like kneeling on a cold airport floor while strangers doubt you. Sometimes it sounds like silence, choosing not to explain yourself when the world demands a story. And sometimes strength is knowing when to step forward without permission and when to step back without regret. Emily Carter's story reminds us that real preparedness isn't about titles, rank, or recognition. It's about what you do in the seconds that matter most, when hesitation costs lives, and clarity saves them. She didn't act because she wanted to be seen. She acted because someone needed help and she knew how to give it. In a world obsessed with authority and appearances, it's easy to forget that competence often speaks quietly. Systems improve not when we celebrate miracles, but when we learn from moments that expose our weaknesses. When we listen to those who act decisively, not loudly. The lesson is simple but not easy. Do the right thing even when no one is watching. Trust your training even when others doubt you. And never let someone else's hesitation silence your ability to help. If this story moved you, share where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you believe quiet courage deserves a spotlight, consider subscribing for more stories that honor strength, integrity, and the moments that define who we are.